NC Collaboratory here at UNC Chapel Hill, and I'm lucky enough to be our moderator today. Before we get started, I think because we are a year out from this tragedy and so many, probably everybody on this webinar was impacted, I would just like us all to take a moment of silence and reflection for those that were impacted and those lives that were lost in this tragedy. Thank you for that indulgence. It's great to be here. I want to echo Kelsey's comments. It's wonderful to have the city of Asheville take the time to share their knowledge and experiences so we can all learn and grow together. One housekeeping note before we do get started on this webinar: if you have any questions during or after the presentation, please use the Q&A button on your menu bar at the bottom of your Zoom window. There's a little question mark there, and submit the questions in that window. It will open up a separate window. The Q&A button looks like a dialog box. I'll keep an eye open on those throughout the session. I've got my question window open already above my camera, so I'll monitor that. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for the day. Got to make sure I get this right, so I'm referencing my notes. I want to do everybody justice. The presentation will be led by Clay Chandler, who is the Public Information Officer for the Asheville Water Resources Department. Prior to joining AWRD in 2023, Clay was the Director of Communications for the Governor of Mississippi. During our Q&A discussion, he will be joined by Bill Hart and Brenna Cook. Bill has been with the department for over 15 years. He currently serves as the Interim Water Resources Director and has also served as the North Fork Water Treatment Plant Supervisor and Water Production Division Manager. Brenna Cook has been with the department for over 20 years. She is the department's compliance manager and oversees monitoring and compliance of the city's drinking water. Prior to this position, Brenna served as a laboratory supervisor as well as an operator at the North Fork plant. So with that, I would like to hand the baton over to Clay Chandler from the city of Asheville.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for this opportunity. Each time Water Resources gets to tell our story, it helps us. And I know that on the slide there, it says that Bill Hart is our director, and he technically on the flow chart is my immediate boss, but Bill and I both learned a long time ago that if we do whatever Brenna says, things will go a lot more smoothly. To get started, as you'll see in the slides coming up after this, we had quite a task ahead of us when we got to work on the morning of September the 28th, one day after Helene before daylight. And it took a lot of people helping us get there. Most, if not all, of the government and private partners that we have are listed there. Big thanks to them, because none of this would have been possible without their assistance. So here's a rough outline of our service area. That's the city of Asheville, city limits there in the black. We serve the city of Asheville, Buncombe County, and a very small sliver of Henderson County, which is directly to our south. We are in the northern district. We are primarily gravity fed, which works really, really well when the water's going downhill. It gets a little more complicated when we have to get it back up the hill. The southern part of our system, mostly pump fed, it's a little flatter in that area, and so that's the best way that we can get water to our customers. We have 3 water treatment facilities. North Fork, which is in Black Mountain, is our workhorse. It supplies water to about 80% of our customers. It pulls out of a reservoir. William DeBrule is just over the ridge from North Fork, and that was actually our first treatment plant. A water treatment facility has been operating on that site a little more than 100 years now. And Mills River in the southern part of our service area is our newest facility. It came online in 1999. We are rated to 43.5 million gallons of water per day. Our average daily demand hovers between somewhere somewhere between 25 and 30 million gallons of water a day. But if we have to, we can redline those operations and push out 43.5 million gallons of water a day. So talking about the impacts from Helene, the southern part of our service area was impacted. There was some damage. It was limited compared to what the northern part of our district experienced, as you'll see in some of the upcoming slides. Mills River never lost operation. It continued to provide water in the immediate aftermath of Helene and afterward. We had substantial impact to North Fork and DeBrule. Those treatment facilities sit at the bottom, and the reservoirs they pull out of sit at the bottom of a mountain valley. And so we had extensive flooding there. We had extensive landslides. And so they were in pretty bad shape in the immediate aftermath of the storm. Like I mentioned, the reservoir at North Fork supplies water to about 80% of our customers. We treat water to be potable using multiple technologies. There are Bee Tree and North Fork. They sit on the eastern edge of our service area, and so we push water east-west. Bee Tree was offline in the immediate aftermath of Helene. They had serious issues with landslides into the reservoir there, which drove up turbidity and eliminated the ability of our filters to handle that water. And so Bee Tree was the first plant to go offline during the storm. Here's how we kind of work. We are conventional, start with our source water, move it to coagulation, then flocculation, then sedimentation, and then we filter it. Pump in our corrosion control and our disinfection, and it's into the distribution system. So we are a direct filtration system. We're the only water system in North Carolina that still uses that filter technology. We think we're one of the very few left in the United States, and that means that our filters function best when they have pristine water to treat. And before Helene, they did. Our two reservoirs at North Fork and DeBrule were pristine and crystal clear. And in a lot of cases, the water directly out of the reservoir with no treatment or filtration almost met EPA drinking water standards. We were very, very proud of that. Generally, turbidity levels before the storm were less than 1. They're back to that now, have been for several months. You can see our treatment processes there. Before the storm, everything was great. The water was pristine. The filters did their job. They were happy. After the storm, that's a little bit of a different story. As you can see in the third square there, that's a preview of the damage that we were dealing with. The worst part of our damage happened where you see those black lines there in the Swannanoa community. The Swannanoa River runs right through that community. You could go out there today and it would be a foot, maybe 2 feet deep, pretty tranquil. You could easily walk across it. At the height of Helene, it was more than a half a mile wide, 20 to 30 feet deep, and rushing pretty good. And that caused a lot of damage, obviously. It washed out all 3 transmission mains coming out of North Fork, the 24 and the 36-inch main lines, and the 36-inch bypass line that was installed after a hurricane event in 2004. That bypass line was designed to withstand an event like the one we had in 2004. As you will see here shortly, it was absolutely no match for Helene. Like I said, Bee Tree was also taken offline because of serious landslide issues into the reservoir there. Also taken out was an 8-inch line that serves one of our wholesale customers, the town of Black Mountain. Also taken out was our primary east-west corridor that runs along the Swannanoa River. In the Swannanoa, that 24-inch line that runs along US Highway 70 was completely washed out as well. And again, visuals of all these coming up to show you. We did have some damage in the city limits to our distribution center. We had some feeder mains and service lines that were messed up. Obviously, the internal plumbing of the homes that were in the path of the flood was messed up too. So we had a lot to deal with. The general way our system works, like I mentioned a minute ago, is we're gravity fed from our reservoirs. Higher elevations, we have a couple dozen pump stations that push water up those mountains and get them to the service connections. That pumps the water uphill using a bunch of different pressure zones that we have. And so this is what another thing that kind of makes us unique. A water system of our size on flat ground would have one, maybe two pressure zones. As you can see there, we have 43 scattered throughout our distribution system. That is a very delicate balancing act because you're talking about extreme pressure changes that are pretty close to each other. Our staff does a really, really good job of maintaining that balance. We have pretty amazing people who come to work with us every day. We're considered a very large utility because we serve over 100,000 people. We have about 64,000 connections or meters that we deliver water to every day, and that translates to about 165,000 or so people who use the water. We have 1,800 miles of pretty complex drinking water infrastructure. For example, that is the same distance if you traveled from Asheville to Miami and back, or if you traveled from Asheville to Denver. So as you can see, we have our hands full under the best of circumstances. Here's a radar look at Hurricane Helene when she was coming through western North Carolina. I'm going to skip that one because I don't want to look at it. In preparation for Helene, here's what we did. We doubled staffing at Mills River Treatment Plant and North Fork Water Treatment Plant. We routed water through that bypass I mentioned a minute ago. I think we did that on like Monday or Tuesday of that week, a couple of days before Helene came through, took water out of the mains coming out of North Fork, routed it through that bypass that again was installed as a redundancy after a pretty severe 2004 hurricane event. We created treatment plant status sheets. Brenna and I were both looking at those the morning of Helene. We were both pretty locked in on those, and we knew around 10 o'clock that morning that we had a pretty serious problem because demand at North Fork jumped from around 25 million gallons a day to 35. Customer communications, we have a system that's called AVL Alert. It uses the Everbridge software system. We can do system-wide or targeted communications to our customers. We leaned heavily on that, at least during the first part of the storm while we still had internet service. Internet service, along with every other utility, was knocked out starting, I think, around Friday night, Saturday morning, right around there. So we had to get pretty creative. North Fork Reservoir, in 2020, we completed a resiliency project. It's the auxiliary spillway that complements the primary spillway that has been in place out at North Fork, I believe, since like the mid-1950s. It is a fuse gate system that is activated automatically when the reservoir reaches a certain level, like it did during Helene. Before Helene, we were 8 feet below full pool. By Thursday night, that's September 26th, which was the night before the worst of the storm got here, we were at full pool. So we went from 8 feet below to full in about 12 to 14 hours, which is pretty remarkable when you think about a reservoir that has 300 or so surface acres and has 6 billion gallons of water in it. That gives you an idea of the amount of rainfall that we were dealing with. By 9:30 on the morning of September the 27th, which is the worst of it, that was the height, we were at 10 feet above full pool. So in about 24 hours, the reservoir, again, 6 billion gallons of water, about 300 surface acres, rose 16 feet. I hope I never see that again. And we remained about 10 feet above full pool until about noon on the 27th, once the worst of the storm got out of here. That's the thing about Helene. It got here pretty quick and it moved out of here pretty quick, thank goodness, because if it had stalled any, it would have been so much worse than what it already was. And so here is the auxiliary spillway I mentioned. That was completed in 2020. That was about a $40 million project that from design, construction to operation took between 7 and 8 years. It relies on a fuse gate system. It's very pretty to look at. That's what it looked like. That's what it looked like before Helene. This next slide is what it looked like on the morning of September the 27th after the fuse gate tipped. Obviously, it's very different. You can see the sheer amount of water that's flowing down that spillway into the North Fork of the Shenandoah River. We are reasonably sure that that water surge right there is what washed out our bypass. But we think that's a pretty good trade-off, because if that auxiliary spillway had not been there, we most likely would have lost the earthen dam at North Fork, and that would have meant 6 billion gallons of water having nowhere to go. It would have flowed through Black Mountain into Shenandoah, into the Biltmore Village area in Asheville, which is just south of downtown. And if that had happened, what was already a catastrophe would have been exponentially worse. We would have lost our primary water treatment plant at North Fork. I would have lost 6 very dear coworkers. The number of fatalities would have been significantly higher, and we would have lost about 80% of our drinking water supply with no quick way to replace it. So that's the general area that water would have flowed if that dam had failed out at North Fork. So that's a pretty good illustration of the swath of destruction it would have cut had that happened. So 9:30, the morning of September the 27th, is when we think the bypass was washed out from North Fork. We knew we had a pretty serious problem somewhere. I think it was on into the afternoon of September the 27th that Bill and his staff were able to walk from the treatment facility at North Fork down to the bypass and put their eyes on it and get visual confirmation that the bypass had washed out. This is the first message that we sent out the morning of September the 27th. It seems so insignificant now as a simple boil water advisory, because we knew we were losing a lot of water somewhere. Again, that's when the bypass washed out. It's kind of funny looking back on this one now, because I'm not sure we truly grasped the extent of the damage we were dealing with when we sent this. After the storm, September 28th and 29th, we had big problems accessing large portions of our system, because a lot of the roads that we took to get to those parts of the system looked like this. A lot of debris, a lot of damage, totally impassable. I do want to give a shout out to the City of Asheville's Public Works Department. They did yeoman's work clearing roads that looked like this so we could access parts of our system to get as clear a picture as possible about the extent and the scope of the damage that we were dealing with. September the 30th is when we kind of started our recovery. That was day one, about 3 days or so after Helene, because that was the first time that we could gain full access to our system. Again, our public works teams did an amazing job clearing roads so our personnel could get to where they needed to be. And we had a couple of really big problems on September the 30th. Number one, we had a distribution system, especially in the eastern third, that was pretty much completely wiped out. That was in the Shenandoah area for the most part. On top of that, the turbidity in our reservoirs had spiked from that usual, below 1 NTU. In fact, I think today it's right around 0.8 or something like that. At North Fork, turbidity reached almost 100 NTU. At DeBrule and Beatree and some of the deeper parts of that reservoir, turbidity exceeded 500 NTU. So water that was normally crystal blue, pristine, you could see 10 to 15 feet down into the reservoir, looked more like chocolate milk at North Fork, and at Beatree, it kind of looked like a chocolate milkshake. That's how thick it was. So step one was to fix the distribution system so we could pump some kind of water into it. And our leadership made the decision, once the distribution system was fixed, because turbidity was too high in the reservoir to run through our filters, we would start feeding highly chlorinated raw lake water into the system. Once that happened, we issued a boil water notice, obviously. And once we were able to feed that highly chlorinated raw lake water into our system, the next problem we turned our attention to was reducing the turbidity in the reservoirs as best we can, so we could run it through our filters and make the water potable again, potable treated water. that kind of thing. So that process, again, our system moves east to west. And so our distribution system was most heavily damaged there in the Swannanoa area where the yellow lines are between there and North Fork. And so our private partners, our contractors, TNK Utilities, Tanoka Construction, TP Howard, they are all local. They all dropped what they were doing, pulled materials and equipment and people from other jobs and prioritized this. It helps that they were local. That means they're probably water customers of ours. So they knew that the more resources they devoted to getting our system put back together, the quicker they would have water. All told, we had about 2,500 feet of transmission mains that were destroyed. And here's a really, really good example. This is the 36-inch bypass at North Fork. That pipe right there, again, serves about 80% of our water customers. Before the storm, that pipe was about 25 feet underground. As you can see there, it is no longer 25 feet under the ground. That is the amount of erosion, the flooding, and the Swannanoa River caused. And again, that pipe was installed after a hurricane event in 2004 as a redundancy. It was designed to withstand an event like the one we had in 2004. As you can see here, it was no match for Helene. And so TNK Utilities, they got to work as quickly as they could. They were able to access the job site at North Fork on September the 30th. That's why day one of our recovery began that way. And you're talking about a pretty complicated fix here. Number one, they had to divert the river. You can see the dry box there they were working in. They worked in 20-foot sections of 36-inch water line to get water back into the system. They worked 24 hours a day, around the clock. And late in the night on October the 10th, they were able to connect the bypass back into the system. This picture was taken very early in the morning of October the 11th. Shout out to Trent and the boys at TNK Utilities. We have this photo blown up and framed. It hangs in our office. And on my last day at City of Asheville Water Resources, which I hope is a couple of decades from now, I'm taking that photo with me. So the normal timeline to repair and replace 2,500 feet of water transmission main between planning, design, construction, operation would be a couple of years. For example, we have a project going on in downtown Asheville right now where we are replacing about 6,600 feet of water line. That project started a couple of months before Helene. It was delayed, obviously, for a few months after the storm. It has since started back, but that project is a 2-year project. So 6,600 feet of water line under normal circumstances would take much, much longer than 15 days. So again, our private partners were amazing during this whole process. Day 5, we connected the 8-inch water line that serves the town of Black Mountain, one of our wholesale customers. Big thanks to City of Greensboro and their crews for handling that for us. And so this is probably the most extensive and complicated repair we had to do in our distribution system that runs along the Swannanoa River. Again, you go out to the Swannanoa River today, it's very tranquil, pleasant to look at. That was not the case on September the 27th. And as you can see here, Tanoka Construction and TP Howard Plumbing, they had a big job ahead of them because that's what Highway 70, which our water lines run alongside of, looked like. There's some of the old water line there. You can see the bridge, which complicated things, debris piled up against it, causing all sorts of mayhem and destruction. There's another look at it after they got a little bit of the roadbed rebuilt. And like I mentioned, damage was often near bridges. I still don't understand how that bridge survived the storm. I really don't. It's about the only thing that survived as far as a structure in that area. It's still there today. I'm not sure if it's reopened, but it's still standing. You can see that gas station right there was pretty much completely wiped out. And so once we got the bypass connected to the system and the system at least rebuilt enough to where we could transport water east from our treatment plants west into the biggest part of our customer base, we were going to move east to west. And so we sort of started doing that in zones, starting up here around North Fork. B Tree was still offline. B Tree is a redundancy. It's kind of our little engine that could. We can pressurize the entire system using just North Fork and Mills River. Again, Mills River never went offline. And so we started here in the east, pushed water west through Swannanoa into the city limits here. Downtown is right along in here somewhere, and then out into West Asheville. That process started on October the 11th, and by October the 21st or the 22nd, all of our customers who could receive water service, their home or business was still intact enough to receive water service, were getting it. So what's that, about 25 or 26 days to get about 95% of water service restored. You can see our zones 1, 2, 3, and 4 there. Here's kind of a timeline. Fixing the infrastructure, obviously nothing could happen until that 36-inch bypass was reconnected. Then nothing else could happen until the 24-inch main along US Highway 70 of Swannanoa was fixed. And so on day 12, bypass was connected. We started feeding raw water into Black Mountain and into our customers in Swannanoa going west. On day 13, on day 14, East Asheville started to get water service. By day 16, North Asheville and West Asheville started to get back into service too. A lot of very, very small breaks and repairs that we started to discover only after the system began to pressurize. It was kind of whack-a-mole at some point. Things would be going well, then we'd have a geyser somewhere based on damage that we couldn't see until water was actually running through the pipes. So within 22 days, we had about 95% of our distribution system put back together. Again, thanks to a Herculean effort from our partners in the private sector, and from our sister water utilities across North Carolina and really across the eastern seaboard. So on October the 30th, we were able to start treating very small amounts of water, running it through our filters. We had done some, one of our private engineering partners had constructed what amounted to a very small pilot treatment plant that had the same kind of direct filtration filters that we use. We started running lake water through that. We felt pretty good about the results. And so on October the 3rd, again, all of this is caused by sediment associated with runoff. And something I probably should have mentioned before now, what Helene did to the reservoirs at our treatment plants was she basically flipped them upside down. So she brought everything that was on the bottom, all that sand, silt, sediment, and everything else, brought all of that right to the top. So backing up just a little bit, the raw water decision that we made, we fed between 4 and 8 parts per million of chlorine. Normally, we're right around 1.6, 1.8 parts per million under normal circumstances. And again, you know, that was deemed, and we worked with EPA and DEQ on this plan before we actually put it into motion. You know, we did have bacteria concerns, so we did use elevated levels of chlorine because we weren't able to run it through our normal treatment systems. Again, these protocols are outlined in our emergency response plan, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. But the ERP was critical. We leaned on it during the response. It spelled out pretty much exactly what we were supposed to do, who was supposed to do it, and when they were supposed to do it. So the highly chlorinated raw lake water, it didn't look good, it didn't smell good, it didn't taste good if you had boiled it for a minute, at least a minute before you consumed it. But it did serve 2 very, very critical purposes. Number one, basic sanitation. People could flush their toilets. In the first couple of weeks after Helene, you couldn't walk 10 feet without passing a bank of porta-johns. Along with the sanitation purpose it served, it provided critical fire flow for our fire departments. It also protected our large volume storage tanks from the elevated chlorine levels kept them nice and disinfected. And so, like I mentioned, after we started feeding raw water into the system, the next big problem we had to solve was addressing the turbidity of the reservoir. Again, immediately after the storm, North Fork was pretty close to 100 NTU. In the deeper parts of Beatree, a DeBrule treatment plant, that number exceeded 500. So to sort of speed up the turbidity reduction process, we did 3 rounds of in-reservoir alum and caustic soda treatment. You can see there the airboat, that's what that's doing. And look, I'm a communications person, I'm visual, and it's kind of unsettling to see 2 people on a boat wearing hazmat suits driving a boat across your drinking water reservoir. I don't think I'll ever get over the sight of that, but it did work. I did mention the pilot plant that CDM Smith put together for us. That sort of helped us come to the conclusion that after a couple of weeks, turbidity had fallen to the point where our filters could handle at least small amounts of water, and we could start blending raw water with treated water. The in-reservoir treatment process, we did install turbidity curtains. Our intake at North Fork is somewhere right in the middle of there. Those curtains are still there in the reservoir. We own them. And so they are going to stay there for the foreseeable future. They did provide a very, very valuable confined treatment area. And I think, like I mentioned, we did 3 rounds of treatment. It was effective. It did speed up the turbidity reduction process. I think the second round was probably the most effective of the 3 rounds that we did. I don't have a reason why that is, but after that second round, we really did see turbidity start to drop. There are the curtains there. They're nice and bright and yellow. You can see how brown that water is in North Fork, even a couple of weeks after Helene. Here's kind of a turbidity chart we put together. Again, September 27th, this red line here, turbidity is still well north of 50. The natural settling that you can see taking place in a couple of weeks after that, round 1 of the in-lake reservoir treatment started on October 15th, October 16th, right around in there. Curtains were installed in time for round 2. Honestly, that's probably why the second round of treatment worked, because the curtains were in the water. Round 3, and as you can see, it keeps going. That turbidity kept falling nicely after those treatments. And, natural settling obviously played a part. So, a couple of major concerns with introducing highly chlorinated raw water into our system. One of those being we were without corrosion control for 19 days. We did have a sampling plan for raw water throughout our distribution system. Brenna and her staff did amazing work, working themselves to the point of exhaustion, taking dozens and dozens of samples throughout the system every single day. All told, I think from the time we started the enhanced sampling process until we lifted the boil water notice and sort of got back to normal, our lab staff took a total, it was way over 1,000 samples. We also did sampling in our reservoir, daily testing for bacteria, pH, and turbidity, daily testing at the intake and the point of entry to the distribution system for manganese, iron, and aluminum, and tested weekly for nitrate. There's a spreadsheet of all our sampling and analysis results. Again, our lab staff did amazing work pulling all that off in such a short amount of time. In our distribution system, we did daily testing for our bacteria and chlorine residuals, average of 35 locations every day. We are very proud to say that we had no positive bacteria samples the entire time. There's our chlorine feed between 7 and 8 in the beginning, went down to 4 to 5 pretty quick. And then by late November, early December, we were pretty much back to normal between 1 and 2 parts per million. I mentioned the absence of corrosion control. Obviously, that brings up lead concerns. Everybody sees the Flint water tower there. Here are some differences between Flint and Asheville. Asheville, we have no known lead service lines. Our main lead concern is the internal plumbing of buildings built before the lead ban in 1998. Some of those homes will have galvanized iron lines. Also, we didn't change our source water. Flint changed from a reservoir to a river. We did not do that. In the short term, disruption and corrosion control for us, it was 19 days. In Flint, it was 17 months. You know, there's not a lot of concrete data on how long corrosion control lasts after you stop it, but we do know it is not instantaneous for the phosphate scales. There's limited data on how quickly that occurs, but I think it's generally accepted that it takes weeks. We were not out of corrosion control for weeks. We were only out for 19 days. We did do initial lead testing in schools under the direction of DEQ, using, the lead threshold kind of jumps all over the place. It used to be 20 parts per billion. A lot of times it's between 10 and 15 parts per billion. Bottled water standard, 5 parts per billion. There are the lead results for the testing in the schools that we did. You'll notice the high lead hit in yellow there at the elementary school. That elementary school is actually in the Mills River service area, which never went offline. That school was being fed corrosion control the entire time. And that obviously shows just how much of an effect stagnation can have, especially if you have lead service lines in your house or your business. By the time we tested these schools, water had been sitting stagnant in those pipes in some cases for 3 weeks, almost a month. There's Glen Arden Elementary again, which is in the Mills River service area, which never lost corrosion control. We did follow-up lead testing in schools. We did consumption taps and non-consumption taps. Results were much closer to normal during those follow-up testing. There's the stagnant and the flushed results. Pre and post testing at lead and copper rule sites. We had completed a couple of months before Helene our regular annual compliance testing, met the 90th percentile, no issues. And as you can see, in our follow-up compliance testing in December, the results were actually better. Compliance and Sentinel sites are key for assessing impact, obviously. And so after all of that, on November the 18th, after our lab staff were able to sample throughout the system and analyze the results, no presence of bacteria, chlorine levels were back to normal, we were able to lift the boil water notice. That was a very good day. Again, no bacteria detected, no raw. Our sampling plan throughout the distribution system also confirmed that the raw water had been completely replaced by treated water. Now, lessons learned, and there were a lot. Number one, engage and collaborate across your networks quickly and regularly. Our director at the time, who has since moved on to another job, he was very connected to our industry partners, our government partners, our sister water utilities, the associations that our water utilities are all members of. And so he was able to pick up the phone pretty quickly and start the process of getting everything that we needed to put the system back together. So maintaining those relationships is absolutely crucial. I've seen it happen. Understand the trade-offs when you make emergency decisions about how to protect public health. And probably most importantly, capture and integrate everything in your emergency response plan. So I mentioned communication in the very beginning. Immediately after Helene, there was no cell phone service. There was very little internet service. And so we had to get pretty primitive in the ways that we communicated. Among water staff, that meant using radios. When it came to communicating with our customers, that meant passing out actual sheets of paper that had information on it. We printed about 30,000 of those every day for a couple of weeks and passed them out to hospitals, community centers, senior living facilities, basically everywhere there was a crowd gathered. Develop an emergency communications plan. Ask for help, both resources and personnel, as well as navigating procedures. Keep the public informed and engaged in recovery conversations. Use multiple platforms, example, press conferences, alternate systems, visuals, drone footage. The drone footage I've shown you in the presentation today is probably the single most effective communication tool I've ever seen. I've been in the communications business almost 20 years. There is no way that we would have been able to convey the scope and the type of damage that we were dealing with after Helene if we did not have that drone video. So again, we mentioned the debate between raw water and no water supply, and obviously the unknown challenges of getting the system recovered if it's dry for an extended period. Raw water, introducing partially treated water into the system, there's some disadvantages that come along with that. But again, you're talking about basic sanitation and fire flow. Just again, no water versus raw water, protecting against acute or chronic health risk. Hyperchlorinating raw water protects against pathogens, obviously, but does increase the formation of disinfection byproducts, or DBPs. There's our THM and haloacetic acid levels. That you can see they're pretty elevated in October and the early part of November. Sampling occurred in November 24. Risk from consuming water for 70 years. EPA uses that running average for the THMs and the haloacetic acids. Non-potable water for toilet flushing. There's some of the graphic that we used when we started pushing raw water into the system. And probably the single most important piece of advice, and Brenna will probably agree with this, update and practice your emergency response plan regularly. We have quarterly trainings that we do that Brenna is in charge of, and they proved invaluable when it came time for us to respond to Helene. That's my presentation. Again, thank you for the opportunity for us to present. Every time we can tell our story, it helps us. And I think now I turn it back over to Jeff.
Clay, thank you for the incredible amount of information, the stories. What a valiant effort y'all put in. What a great success story. I've already seen a few comments coming over the chat. This is the best webinar they've seen in quite some time, if not ever. Just to let everybody know, this webinar is being recorded and will be distributed to all the participants, so you'll get to watch it again and have this information at hand. I'm going to just start cruising down the questions that are popping up on my screen above me. First of all, we've got one. What kinds of activities can help reduce turbidity in a reservoir?
Brenda, this is probably your wheelhouse, but I mean, I would start with the in-reservoir treatment that we did with alum and caustic soda combined with turbidity curtains that created that confined treatment area. I really, really think that helped.
I think so too, and Bill, you can jump in as well. I think time, though, is your biggest thing, and depending on what kind of turbidity, because like at first it was very thick turbidity, for lack of better expanding explanation, but once the heavier turbidity settled out and we had those fine clay particles, that's where I think the alum and caustic helped. Bill?
Yeah, and one of the things with our reservoirs, initially we have very, very good riparian buffers. The land is forested.
Yeah.
We take very good care of the watersheds. That was probably one of the more detrimental things for us, though, is that the amount of water that came down in the flooding really scoured our streams. A stream that might have been 50 yards wide is now 300 yards wide, and it scoured it all the way down to cobble. So the reality is, when you put that much sediment into a reservoir, it really does come to time. I think time, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, y'all do take your buffers seriously. If anybody drives through the interstate in that area, you'll see the signs on hazmat response that it is in a drinking water watershed.
Yeah. Yeah, but it really does come to time. And to what Brenna said, the initial turbidity was very different than the turbidity we had, even probably 5 to 10 days afterwards. Having a pilot plant that allowed us to run water through gave us the confidence that we would not do anything that negatively affected our filter plant and could have possibly kept us out of the production for much longer.
Got another question here. This was a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of supplies, a lot of person power. How was it funded?
So the reality of these things is we have a capital budget. We had some money available. Under emergency declaration, we were able to put contracts in place. We work with some incredible engineering firms. In fact, I would say that any engineering firm, any vendor we've ever worked with reached out to us almost immediately. They said, what can we do to help? People offered their services for free. People brought us materials. People were willing to do everything they could to help us. Having these relationships, and Clay also mentioned this, our former director was very well connected, and he was able to leverage some of those connections to get additional help. So the network and the community that we work in is just absolutely amazing.
I've got another one here. While highly chlorinating the raw water and sending it into the distribution system, were disinfection byproducts a concern?
I'll take. Yeah, they were, but we were also just like back to like trying to get back to normal as quickly as possible. We chose, after speaking with EPA and DEQ, we chose to highly chlorinate because there was more acute danger from bacteria than from the disinfection byproducts. And we had potable water stations all throughout the county. This was mainly just to be able to give people water for sanitation purposes and firefighting, but we were also trying to protect our reservoirs outside in the distribution system, because if we hadn't done that, we'd have had to drain every single one of them, highly chlorinate them, and to get before we could even get back online to lift the boil water notice. So this was to save time.
Got another question here about prioritization. Facilities like medical and nursing home facilities, were any special measures taken for restoring their water first?
So the reality is that a lot of these folks have emergency supply plans. They were purchasing water through tanker trucks, bringing them into their facilities. So at this time, we were more focused on just getting the water into the city and throughout the county.
And I'll add on to that. The way I showed this in a couple of slides, from North Fork at least, the way our distribution system works, it runs east to west. And so, you know, downtown Asheville is not going to have water until Swannanoa has water. West Asheville is not going to have water until downtown does. And so there are very small things we can do to sort of manipulate the direction of that water a little bit. But for the most part, if you live in the west and the east doesn't have water, you're not going to have water.
Were there any known incidents of health issues from customers while raw water was in the system?
None that made its way to us.
Yeah, we're not aware of any.
Okay, great. Was there a measured difference in reservoir capacity due to sediment directly after Helene? I assume there was. What was that loss, and have you mitigated that through dredging or any other type of removal?
So we're in the process right now. We've done some bathymetry, and that is being analyzed. We know that we've lost capacity in the Beatree Reservoir because of some severe landslides that came in. And in the top of the reservoir, we had a lot of cobble, sand, and debris come in. We have not really verified to what extent we've lost capacity at this point.
Okay. Yeah, I think that also answers another question about the potential plans to dredge. So let me clear that. Lots of great questions coming in. I'm trying to choose. I'm not sure we can get to any of them. One was, you had a very effective response to Helene's devastation. Looking back, is there anything you would have done differently in hindsight?
In my personal opinion, we'd have done better tracking during the, resources tracking our resources better, because we were just in such a hurry and we had so many people offering help. It's really hard to track that. So we would like to be able, that's one of the things we're focusing on now, is making sure we have the correct tracking so that we can get paid by, if we can get a reimbursement, that we can get paid, because a lot of this past year after Helene has been getting all records together so that we can get any type of reimbursement back. Did I cover that well, Bill?
You did. The reality is, and I think anytime you look backwards, you can see gaps and things that you might have done differently. I think the response was really very good for the most part. I think we learn every time we go through a situation like this. You know, one of the things we've talked about kind of in the aftermath is we probably wouldn't have gone quite as high on the chlorine. We are looking at ways to kind of quantify at what level of turbidity, if we ever had to do this again, what would that level of chlorine be? Not having the capacity at the time to feed in zinc orthophosphate and things to take care of corrosion. We're actually planning to put some things in place, so if we ever had to do this again, we would have that capacity. I think you'll always look back, and I think you can pick it apart, and you can always find things that you could do better. I was very, very happy with the results we had. We've got an amazing group of people. We had incredible resources that were brought in to help us, the Army Corps of Engineers, the EPA, FEMA. These folks were on the ground with us within 3 days. So I'm very pleased at the way this went. It's kind of the best of a bad situation.
Got another question here. What kind of message for Flushing went out to the residents after you were able to lift the boil water advisory? Were extra steps added to the nature of this event?
That was, yeah, I mentioned that in a handful. So we did daily media briefings beginning right after the storm that went on for months. And when we lifted the boil water notice, we did include extensive messaging about, if you haven't turned your water on since before the storm, when you do, you need to let it run for a while. Because, we all know what happens when water sits in pipes, sediment gathers up, there's leaching and all of that. And so the flushing messaging was pretty extensive once we lifted the boil water notice. And really, even before then, the flushing message was pretty extensive.
We even gave tips on how to turn off, or, like turning off your hot water heater and then turning it back on, how to make sure to flush that. It went very in depth in some cases.
Have you received any feedback from the public? Have they generally been pleased?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
There's always some people you can't please with a pleasing stick, right?
Yeah.
Any specific feedback from the public that you all have integrated into your operations moving forward, or your emergency management planning?
More clay, less turbidity. Nah, everybody that I see out in the field, they were grateful for the communication. I've been told several times it helped keep them calm. And so that, and they were very grateful to have that. So I think us hiring Clay was a very good decision to have, because if we didn't have him or Ben Woody, I think it could have been a whole different situation.
I also think, to add to that, I think that people appreciated us being brutally honest with them, especially in the beginning. And again, that drone imagery that we had really told the story. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, we were probably up to a 15. And we told our customers exactly how bad it was. And one thing we never did was offer any kind of timeline about when service would be back. We said it would be measured in weeks. We didn't say how many weeks, because we didn't know. Once our contractors and personnel were able to get to the parts of the system that had been blocked immediately after the storm, you start a large scale construction project like that, there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong. There's a lot of variables with things like supply chain. I mean, Asheville, right after Helene, was pretty much completely cut off. I-40 was closed in both directions. I-26 for a brief period was closed in both directions. And so for a few days there, we had no way to get supplies here. And we knew that would affect the timeline for getting service restored.
Yeah. And y'all are still down to just one lane between Asheville and Knoxville, right?
Yep.
So
The gorge. Yep.
we got about time for one more question. Maybe we can squeeze another one in. A quick one. What did you do on water billing? Were there any billing adjustments during this period or billing suspensions?
We stopped billing on September the 28th, and we didn't resume billing until we lifted the boil water notice. We didn't charge people for the raw water that we put into the system.
Okay. And I think I've seen a general trend on a handful of questions. What have you done with critical infrastructure and learned, like, moving forward, and how you've kind of disaster proofed and made some new decisions as you've repaired and replaced some of this infrastructure?
We do have some resiliency projects that are underway that Bill could speak to.
Yeah, so I don't think there's a possible way to disaster proof. One of the things that we learned from Helene is that nature can do things that you would not expect or that you even have control over. Things that have happened in the past that made us successful, and I'd point out the 2020 dam project where we added an auxiliary spillway and fuse gates at North Fork, as well as a parapet wall. Those provided resilience, and they provided protection for our reservoir and that water source. That's the reason we still have the reservoir. We will be adding permanent treatment changes to both the North Fork and the William DeBrule treatment plants. We're adding a third transmission line that will come out of North Fork. It will stay away from the river, so we will have a total of 3 different ways to get water out of North Fork if we have to. We feel certain that this is going to keep us in the ability to produce water, and the treatment we're going to add at both of these plants will keep both of those plants able to function, even with 100 or 500 NTU water.
Well, I tell you what, Clay, Bill, Brenna, thank you so much for this information, your time, for the transparency, for the efforts, the resolve, and the true grit. I'm actually headed up the mountain tomorrow, and I'll be looking forward to drinking your water in Black Mountain in Asheville. I'd like to turn it back over to our host, Dr. Kelsey Piper. I always say that wrong. Sorry, Kelsey.
No worries. I just go by Kelsey. So I want to say, first of all, thank you to the city of Asheville. This has been an amazing presentation and discussion, and thanks to Jeff for moderating. A copy of this presentation will be posted online. I will be reaching out to you to share where that link will be. And with that, if you have questions, Clay is the point of contact for the city of Asheville. That is his email. If you have questions, my email is kpiper@charlotte.edu. And thanks again for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.